Glad to have you here again, Jeff Clements, CEO of American Promise. American Promise is uniting Americans across the political spectrum and across the country to tackle once and for all the number one problem, according to almost all Americans, and the number one solvable problem, and that's money in politics. It's solvable with a constitutional amendment. That's a big lift, and we are doing the lift, and we'll have an update for you on how that's going, which is very well, just at the top, and then we'll open it up to a great conversation that we're going to have with Maureen Kline, who is the head VP of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Pirelli Tire USA, and Michael Donnelly, who's the Chief Economist at IBM. I'll be giving them a more thorough introduction that they deserve as great leaders in business. When we come back to their conversation in a minute, but let me, as this is our quarterly check-in, and we have both new folks who have not heard about what American Promise is doing, and some wonderful people who have been rolling up their sleeves and getting this constitutional amendment to fix American democracy and money in politics done. We always do a check-in, and I want to start with kind of framing it around what this conversation's about. When we started 6 years ago at American Promise, some of you will remember there were a bunch of things that people said, like constitutional amendment's too hard. You'll never get Americans to care about money in politics. You'll never get, the Democrats told us you'll never get Republicans. The Republicans told us you'll never get Democrats. And almost everybody told us you'll never get business support and corporations. And all of those things we knew were wrong, and we've proved it. And we'll prove it with the conversation tonight, particularly that last point. We see business people all over the country, all over the world, deeply concerned about the problem of money and corruption in U.S. politics, and stepping in to help their fellow citizens as business leaders and get it done. And we'll talk to our guest tonight about why that is. But getting Americans to care, well, we have won 7 ballot initiatives. The most recent, 86% in yes vote for a constitutional amendment resolution in the state of Maine. That's 7 ballot initiatives so far. 22 states have now formally called on Congress to amend the Constitution. That's a 2/3 vote we need, so that Americans have the power, which we the people have always had until the Supreme Court said we didn't, to enact effective regulations to protect our elections, protect our voices, protect our votes in our democratic form of self-government. And so those states are driving support in Congress, which is really moving ahead. And as for whether Americans care about money in politics, the most recent Pew Research study, which has regularly polled and surveyed Americans about their highest priorities. The economy is always at the top. Terrorism's usually up at the top. Number 3 can be a lot of different things. Right now, number 3 is reducing the influence of money in politics. Top priority of Americans. It's ahead of immigration and the border. It's ahead of crime. It's ahead of just about everything. Americans deeply care, and we know that because we see them stepping up, getting behind American Promise, just as you are on this call. Just in the last quarter, we won a majority vote in Pennsylvania on a key committee, 22-3, Republicans, Democrats joining together. So much for the theory that the other side, quote unquote, won't support this. We are Republicans, we are Democrats, we are independents at American Promise, and we're getting behind this. Wyoming, we passed the House. We actually got a majority vote in the House. We'll need 2/3, so we'll be driving that to victory in the next session. Wisconsin went to the floor, just shy of a floor vote with deep cross-partisan support. And our Congressional Affairs Director, Jim Dornan, a veteran on Capitol Hill, reports strong interest in our amendment across the aisle. And you can find out more and help get Congress's attention at the National Citizen Leadership Conference. Do sign up for that. Maybe one of our team can put the link into the chat. It's coming up June 11 and June 12. Hope in the age of polarization. That's the theme this year. And the hope comes from the good work that you all and people across the country are doing. I also want to thank our sponsors. I see Jeff from the State Business Executives in the chat. Thank you for joining us and for your sponsorship, and for Business for Democracy. Thanks to you as well. Let me talk a little bit about how we do all this. American Promise's job is not to do it. Our job is to enable Americans to do the heavy lifting of amending our Constitution, as we have always done when the chips are down. And that's what's happening now. And it's in large part because, thanks to you and so many people around the country, American Promise has been able to grow, expand these state campaigns, get a congressional affairs director in place, bring this to Americans across the country. So we are in big growth mode. Our staff is growing, our team is growing, and that's so we can support the efforts of Americans across the country. And as a key part of that growth, I'm now pleased to introduce our new president, who reports to me. And for those who got on late, I'm Jeff Clements, CEO of American Promise, and I am so pleased to be working closely in the leadership with our new president, Anastasia Koo. And Anastasia will join me in just a minute to just say a few words of introduction. But I want to tell you about her. Anastasia has personal experience in big national campaigns that bring a constitutional question to the forefront of American thinking, and trust that Americans can handle constitutional debate and make a decision. She spent nearly a decade leading the communications at Human Rights Campaign, which led to the constitutional change to secure equal marriage rights for all Americans. She then went to Conservation International, a global conservation organization with close to $300 million budget, 1,700 employees. She was chief of staff and grew that organization to that scale. Let me just say, Anastasia knows what she's doing, and we are so thrilled to have her with us now on the American Promise team. Anastasia, welcome to American Promise. Welcome to the Leadership Speaker Series, and over to you for a minute.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I am really thrilled to be joining the team at American Promise. I have, as Jeff had mentioned, I have some experience making some changes in this country. And I've always felt that, the antidote to despair is doing. And I think that we're at a critical moment in this country, and I couldn't find a better cause to lend my talents to help grow this organization and grow the awareness of this issue. Looking back, when I joined the Human Rights Campaign in 2005, no one thought that marriage equality was going to be a reality. I mean, there are many similar parallels to what Jeff was saying at the beginning of this, that people didn't think it could be done. And a decade later, I found myself on the steps of the Supreme Court when marriage equality became the law of the land. And so I have witnessed change. I know it's possible, and I believe in the American people to help get us there. I'm most excited about this conversation this evening because I've also seen the power that businesses and corporations can play in helping advance important issues. Marriage equality certainly being one where you had many companies weighing in to help move the needle on equality, but most recently on the topic of sustainability, many companies and businesses are really driving forward the necessary changes to protect the environment. So I'm just really thrilled to have this conversation tonight and to listen to Michael and Maureen. And again, so thrilled to join the team here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Anastasia. And with that, we are going to turn it to our guests and to our conversation. Let me give brief introductions of both of them, and then we'll open it up. Let me start with, on the introduction side, with Mike Donnelly. He's the Chief Economist at IBM, and he oversees risk management, updating and briefing senior management, including the CEO and CFO. My notes here says to anticipate revenue loss and prepare for earnings calls, but I'm sure he also anticipates revenue gains as well, not just losses, at IBM, one of America's and the world's most respected companies who have been in it for the long haul. And so he has forecasted, and part of his job is to forecast economic activity across 170 different countries, the global environment in which IBM operates. He conducts scenario analysis, research, supports IBM sales operations. And in addition to all of the economic sort of visibility that a company like IBM needs to have, Michael brings some interesting work, including creating the Equality Index for the National Urban League, which was presented at the United Nations. His expertise has been recognized in media outlets like the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. He has his BS in finance from the University of Steubenville and an MBA in economics and finance from the NYU Stern School of Business. Michael, we're really glad to have you with us. Thank you. And let me introduce Maureen Kline now. And Maureen is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Pirelli Tire North America. She's responsible for the US, Canada, and Mexico in that role, and is based in Washington, D.C. She plays an active role in the US Tire Manufacturers Association and the Tire and Rubber Association of Canada. She's on the MEMA Center for Sustainability Steering Committee and the Corporate Responsibility Steering Committee of the Automotive Industry Action Group. She previously was based in the world headquarters of Pirelli Tire, a global public company in Milan, and was responsible for the governmental affairs for the company's subsidiaries around the world. Before that, Maureen was a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, covering Italy, edited a blog on meritocracy, as well as wrote and co-hosted a TV show covering business and finance in Italy. And she holds her bachelor's degree from Yale University and a master's degree from the London School of Economics. Maureen, benvenuta.
That was probably too much information.
All right, I'll try English. Welcome. We're so glad to have you with us. Thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules for this important conversation. Maureen, you are, and Pirelli Tire are proof with so many others, and John McCree, our head of our business network, will say more about this, of business people and companies who are trying to get the word out that good democracy, good regulation of money in politics is a good business environment and good for business. You joined the American Promise Advisory Council. Pirelli Tire signed on to the American Promise Business Network. Tell us why that is.
So, well, first of all, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that economy is at the top of the priorities. Americans, I would say that we joined because we believe in free and fair markets, and that distorting those markets does affect the economy. In fact, I've been reading this wonderful book. I don't know. I guess it doesn't show up on the Zoom, but
what's it called?
The book is called The Great Reversal: How America Gave Up on Free Markets. It's by a French economist named Thomas Philippon, or Thomas Philippon. And basically he maintains that in the last 25 years, that the markets are no longer free in America, and as evidenced by things like higher broadband costs to consumers, higher healthcare costs, and weaker outcomes, things like that, compared with other countries. Obviously, the U.S. is very competitive, has strong growth, but he, in this book, he really outlines how competition has declined, domestic competition has declined because of corporate campaign finance and lobbying, and And he talks about the effects of that being lower wages, lower investment, lower productivity, lower growth, and more inequality. And he actually estimates that GDP would be 5% higher and US wages would be $1.5 trillion more, which obviously would help drive consumption if we went back to the level of competitiveness that we had in the 1990s, so before Citizens United, and before the sheer scale of corporate money and politics got so huge. So Pirelli is, as you mentioned, is headquartered in Italy, and it has been essentially a family-controlled company for more than 150 years. So like IBM, it's we're kind of in for with the long-term vision, even though it is publicly traded in Milan. And so we don't just sort of make and sell tires and look at quarterly profits. We are thinking about the whole context of where we operate and how our business affects the environment and society, and what we can do to improve things. And I think that there, as I thought about this webinar, I think there are really two ways that you can do or think about lobbying, and of course campaign finance behind that. So we've always had a ban on corporate money in politics. Pirelli doesn't give money to, here I'll read you the line from our code of ethics. Pirelli does not pay any contributions or subsidies to political parties or trade unions, nor to their representatives or candidates. And that's part of our code of ethics. And so that's kind of the basis written in stone. And then from there, I think, as I started to say, I think you can think of lobbying in two ways. One is engaging with regulators and legislators, policymakers, in order to answer questions, educate, and try to contribute to solutions. And the other way is regulatory capture. So, reaching out to government officials in order to look for gains for your company, and in the worst case, to the detriment of society. So in other words, if I went and lobbied for a tax loophole just for my company, somebody else is going to have to pay for that. And so that distorts the free market. And really, another thing that Philippon points out in the book is that when do companies most want to lobby? Just like we go to the doctor most often when we're sick, we would lobby most often when we need protection from, something that's threatening our position, our financial position, and so on. And so, so the result is that you get less competitive industries. Now, I don't think that's really happened in my industry, and I think manufacturing in general is a little bit different than services. And there are a lot of nuances. But overall, to answer your question about why we joined, this is, in addition to our code of ethics and our lobbying policy, which talks about engagement, not regulatory capture, we also have a free and fair competition policy, and we also have a global tax policy, as you mentioned, which talks about integrity, fairness, not using tax havens, and so I think all of these things are a part of being a responsible corporate citizen.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. Maureen, and thank you both for that excellent metaphor about lobbying in the doctor's office. That it does seem like in a healthy company, in a healthy economic environment, you don't need help from changing protection or policy shifts that hurt your competitors and build in some advantage to a unhealthy incumbent. But it's really something to think about. I have a question, but I want to bring in Ed Ludwig's question in the chat with it, and encourage others who are listening in. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll sort of integrate them into the conversation as well as tee them up for the Q&A, which we'll have too. But I want to dig in a little bit about the role of the public and the relationship of the citizen and the company in a way. In countries, most representative democracies in the world have regulation of money and politics, have limits, have some form of democratically determined rules about the role of economic power in the political space. And the Supreme Court, and particularly Citizens United, the most famous case, as you mentioned, has really incapacitated the American public from deciding whether and how to actually have some guardrails around the role of money in the political system. And in some ways, this is a question of like, who should decide this? I mean, it's one thing, and it's great that there are responsible companies. There are also companies that aren't so responsible, but it doesn't, in the end, the inability to have limits or guardrails around money and politics in America, it seems to me it's sort of a advantage to the least responsible among us, just in the same way that, you know, deciding we're not allowed to have stop signs or red lights might you know, basically disadvantage the safety conscious and the responsible citizen as against the irresponsible one. So what do you see in other countries, and you know, how would you speak to the notion of not only domestic spending, but we now have, you know, foreign owned, government owned, and not just public companies, 100% government owned sovereign funds in some cases, sometimes outright government ownership of companies coming in, spending money in American politics and saying there is no way we should do this. We could do this at home. We don't even really want to do it here, but this seems to be the American way. What has happened, and what is the role for the citizen versus business?
Well, there's so many parts to that question. First of all, to address the question in the chat, I do think that PACs are the sort of least bad part of campaign finance because they're so transparent and so limited in amounts of money. However, public company boards of directors definitely should raise this and, you know, and just dig into why is there a need for a PAC? Why is there a need for campaign finance, in my opinion? Then the next thing you talked about, you know, living in a small town. I've mostly lived in big cities my whole life, but I did live briefly in a small town in Georgia, or relatively small, where Pirelli has our manufacturing in Rome, Georgia, as you like to remind us. And I was really, I was surprised to notice how much I thought it was a bad idea for anyone from outside of my local area to be contributing to the candidates, because money was coming in on both sides from all over the country, and it didn't feel right that other people were deciding instead of the local voters. You know, so that's a democracy in general. And then in terms of foreign interference, of course, I mean, I think probably the strongest laws are the ones against, or at least on the lobbying side, against foreign government interference. And that's important, obviously. I do, as a representative, though, of a foreign-owned subsidiary in the United States, I feel like there should be a level playing field there too. So if, you know, I represent a U.S. company because it's, even if it has foreign ownership, it's a U.S. company. Again, I don't think any company should be contributing to campaign finance, but I don't know that I would want to have a law that says U.S. owned companies can, but foreign owned companies can't, because that would be first of all complicated, but also it would be a competitive disadvantage to be, let's say, a European owned tire company as opposed to a U.S. owned tire.
Yeah. Maureen, you broke up just a little bit, but I think we got at the competitive disadvantage of prohibiting global companies, foreign-owned companies versus U.S. companies, and I think most Americans might well agree on the level playing field, and like you would like to see and have the ability to have limits on corporate spending, period, in elections, whether domestic or global, which is what we have enacted every time Americans got the chance, basically going back to 1912 and the Roosevelt administration, continuing through McCain-Feingold. The idea of a level playing field was very much part of the rules, but with limits that applied to everybody. And I think with no limits, it's I don't think anybody's very happy with that. And maybe a few, but not the super majority that's backing this constitutional amendment. So thank you, Maureen. We're going to please stand by. I'm going to keep you in the conversation, but I want to bring Michael Donnelly into the conversation, Chief Economist at IBM. Michael, we're so glad to have you with us. I want you to pick up where Maureen sort of took us. IBM also has a policy and has had a policy for over a century of no political spending. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so on my slide deck, I've got one little quote from Thomas Watson Jr. He's one of our CEOs back in the 60s. And he said that IBM, we believe in engaging policy, not politics. A company, quote, should not try to function as a political organization in any way, unquote. And that's why in the past 110 years, we've never had a political action committee, never had a PAC. We don't make any political donations at all. We just completely refuse to engage in that kind of activity. We don't think it's helpful to the country. We don't think it's helpful to ourselves in the long term. You have to be able to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You don't want some artificial prop keeping you going. You want to maintain your own sort of productivity and your own sort of ability to compete in the global marketplace without aid. So that's part of the reasons. So as I was thinking about that question that's on the chat there, about how do you convince your board of directors to stay away from political contributions? Well, you could try to appeal to their better nature. That's part of what we do at IBM. Appeal to our better nature to not get involved in that sort of thing. You can make the economic projection and say that there's better economics. And on my slide deck, I've also got, and I'll share this on my LinkedIn. I'll share the slide deck for people to grab if they want to see it. But there's a whole bunch of IMF studies and other various studies that all say the same thing, that when you start introducing money into politics, you get slower economic growth and you get worse outcomes. And if you can do it, then your competitor can do it. So, you don't want to get involved in that. You want to keep it out. But ultimately, you could almost just say, let's do it by self-interest. And that's sort of what I started tangentially talking about a little bit. If you think about times and periods where the government really gets involved in the economy, you get bad outcomes. So think about the 1970s when we put gigantic tariffs on cars, and our cars internally started to become fairly lazy and bad product. We got bad cars coming out of that. You don't want the government help. You don't want that sugar rush. You go to the gym, work out. You gotta do this on your own. So if you lose that self-discipline, if you lose that self-rigor, you lose the ability to fight harder in the global marketplace. And it's just long-term, those muscles become weak. And so it's just bad. Think about self-interest. It's just bad for you, bad for your company.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So we got another, the doctor's office. Now we got the gym. We're starting to pick up the metaphor, folks. So this is this is a game for the those who are fit and stay with some discipline. So let me ask you. You mentioned the slide deck. I want you to go to it and unpack a little bit this argument. But before you do, I want to shout out Paul Murdoch's question in the chat. It seems we have a lack of knowledge concerning civics in the U.S. How do we address the lack of understanding concerning the process of constitutional change? That's one of the things American Promise and all of us need to do, and that's what this conversation is about. So thank you, Paul. I think this deck that I referenced it because I think, there's a lot of people on this call and hearing this and around the country who've worked in their state legislatures as citizens to advocate for constitutional change, who are coming to the National Citizen Leadership Conference next month and doing a citizen lobby day. The way we change the Constitution in America, and always has, with 27 amendments, is a vote of 2/3 of Congress, ratification in 3/4 of the states. So that's 67 senators, 290 House members, and 38 state legislatures ratifying. So while Zai and the team are getting your screen share set up, let me just say that that's a civic exercise of the kind that Americans do regularly. About every generation or two, we do 2 or 3 or 4 even amendments to the Constitution, reaffirming again the civic muscles, to continue the metaphor of fitness, our citizens' civic muscles, to get the constitutional rules that make sense for us now. One of those now, of course, is getting a handle on the power of money in politics. It will take an amendment. It's well along. And if you have been looking for some business arguments as you are doing your civic muscle conversations with your fellow citizens and legislatures, time to tune in, because Michael Donnelly, Chief Economist at IBM, is going to take us through his deck on why the relationship of money in politics to bad economic outcomes and IBM's no political spending rules. So, Michael, thank you. Back to you.
All right. I think I need to be able to share my screen.
Yeah.
Can I do that? Can I share my screen?
Zai, can you help us with that?
Yep. You should have access. Is it showing?
You see down on the bottom, share screen?
It says disabled. Host is disabled. They don't trust me. Host is
Zai, that's what I have too. So can we get that fixed?
No problem.
Okay, that was Zai's working on that technical stuff. Michael, let me ask you, without the screen in front of you, tell us a little bit more about your deck. Give us an intro of it, and then we'll get you
Sure.
open for business.
Yeah. So a bunch of caveats to begin with. I don't speak for IBM. I'm not cleared to share IBM internal knowledge. So everything I'll share will be my own opinion. But I will have IBM's some quotes from IBM about how we feel about money in politics, and we're certainly against it. So my deck, a couple of things I want to do is go through some of the risks that IBM sees, and some of the reasons for the risks are very much in this money in politics problem. I've got this little brain drain presentation I can share with all of you, showing how fewer and fewer people are going to college, not only as raw numbers, but percentage, and also including the percentage of those people that are around. So, if you thought, well, maybe, Mike, there's less people going to college because there's less young kids. Well, that's not the case. The percentage of kids going to college is less as well. So that's one of my slides. The next slide is, we also have a brain drain in terms of the number of scientists that are coming into America. America used to be a very welcoming kind of place where everyone would come into and would want to come here to study and to learn and to do research. And we have fewer and fewer. Actually, the last time they did the survey, it's not a survey, it's just counting. There's actually an outflow of scientists going elsewhere. And China's now taken lead into where people want to go to do research. So that's dramatically that's a dramatic development for us as well as Americans, but also as a company that depends on American research. America's not the place to be anymore. So there's a sense that we're not welcoming and that we're not bringing people in. And so that's the big what of the presentation, a whole lot less people going to college and studying and coming here. The how does it matter is our international education advantage has collapsed. For every one, let's do it the other way around. For every, in our population in 1950, we had 8 college-educated workers in America for every 1 college-educated worker around the world in their workforces. So we had this huge 8-to-1 ratio in 1950s, where we had this tremendous emphasis on education. The rest of the world's been catching up, and we've been de-emphasizing that, so that by 2015, the ratio is 2-to-1. So for every 2 college-educated people in our workforce, the rest of the world has 1. So they've really made huge, huge gains. Secondly, we've seen a huge decline in productivity. This is part of the how of why this matters. And patent creation is shrinking as well. So we've got fewer new firms coming out, less patent creation, and a lot less productivity. And then one of the big takeaway slides is this huge amount of productivity that's declined. Productivity is sort of the economist shorthand for this magic elixir of how we create more with what we have. And when you can create more, it's a win-win situation. You've got rising tide lifting all boats. And when productivity collapses, it becomes sort of a scramble for resources and a zero-sum game where you can think of even the popular culture starts to show up. So the 1940s and 1960s,
Hey,
where we had
Michael,
this,
let me introduce you for 1 second. We have the problem fixed. We want to get your slides up so you can fix it right where I stopped you right there, and just get right to it. My apologies for that.
No problem, no problem. I don't mind talking through the presentation.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, so
there we go. Except that, there we go. Perfect.
You can see that?
Yes,
Whoops.
we can.
All right. So here's this big decline in productivity. So here I'll go through and let you see the slides real quick. There's the big what's going on. Big decline in college enrollment. We had 20 million people at college. Now we only have 17 million. I also shouted out right before the COVID pandemic, just in case you thought, it's just COVID, Mike, don't worry about it. There's a percentage, so it's not just that we have fewer young people, but the percentage of young people going to college has dropped off quite dramatically as well. So we're down 15%, down 3 million students. Here's a slide for how many scientists are coming into America. America for decades is where most scientists were coming, and they were leaving the rest of the OECD to come here. That was great for us. In China, it was pretty much balanced, but actually China's taking the lead now. So just really a not a very welcoming place to be. I've already talked through this slide. So here's my big productivity slide. So think about how this impacts the culture. So in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, obviously we had a bunch of societal ills, but productivity and economic growth was just robust. And so in the popular culture, things like the Jetsons, I know it's just a cartoon, but they had this idea that, in 100 years, the average person will work 2 days a week just for an hour, most of the time being yelled by his boss. And Star Trek was very optimistic too. They thought in 100 years would be, not they didn't think, but the fiction was that in 100 years, we'd have warp drive. Then in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s, we started having less productivity. See that feed into the popular culture. Okay, we still have flying cars in Blade Runner. We still have flying cars in Back to the Future too, but it's dirty. Kind of nasty. It's not as good as it used to be. So downward turn. In the last 14 years, I think that the popular culture has gotten just outright dystopian. So things like Interstellar, Black Mirror, Hunger Games is probably the best example of a zero-sum culture where if I'm going to have something, I got to take it away from somebody else. And so what does that mean for a country? Well, what that means for a country is that you become hostile to outsiders. So there's a pretty famous guy there on the left-hand side of the screen where we were very welcoming. And we said, hey, everybody come here and let's win some Nobel Prizes. And 3 out of every 4 Nobel Prizes that we won this year were from an immigrant. And without them, we would have won a whole lot less Nobel Prizes. We also refused to give a green card to this one Turkish guy who came up with 5G technology. Instead, he went to China. So now China's got 5G technology before we did. So again, this hostility to outsiders, because it's a zero-sum game, we're worried about keeping what we've got and not thinking about growing the pie. So, all right, why? Why are we doing this? The why is very controversial. The deck is about 100 pages, but I can't do it all now. But there's a lot of things here that we'll just quickly touch on. This stagnant growth is really ushered in this fixed economic pies mentality, zero-sum conflict. We see this pretty much in 2 areas. One, the value of education has gone down a lot. So you saw that big decline in the number of people being educated. Science and investing, are they good ideas? Those are now becoming partisan issues. There's entire political parties that are thinking this isn't a good idea. and immigration, as I just shown, has really withered. So we need to return to this values. So how does this all play into money and politics, Mike? What's going on here? Why is this presentation here? All right, I'll say it. So obviously there's a bunch of short-term solutions, more government investments in the big deck. We go through all those. But in the long term, we sort of need to return to this idea of 1940s, 1980s, removing the corrupting influence of money in politics to pay for play. The IMF study came out and said that corruption is negatively linked to the level of investment in economic growth. The more corruption you get, the less investment you get, the less economic growth you get. None of these are things that business wants to see. Corrupt politicians choose investment projects that line their pockets. These bribes really reduce the economic worth of projects. Another IMF study there. And economic theory says that high levels of corruption are associated with lower quality goods, lower value of services. I touched on that a little bit with the 1970s example. There's a bunch of various studies that click on that. And then last but not least, the power that money gives to the big spenders to reshape the economy gives them what they want, lower taxes and underinvestment. And those two things, especially the second one, the underinvestment in the future, is really what is detrimental to economic growth. And part of the reason why IBM is very strong on this issue, that we just want to see better economic policy and faster economic growth. So I'll put this up on my LinkedIn page and make this available to people too. But that's just a quick thought process of how corruption plays and how money and politics impacts our economy. So, I'll say that there's a question in the chat about, I'll reread the question. Basically, it asks, what should we do? Hold on, let me get to it. Actually, Jeff, why don't you ask a question? I'll try to line up the question.
Okay. Well, Michael, thank you so much. And we'll tee up some questions. Maureen, jump in as well on these, and we'll open it up. If you're finding your specific question, Michael, just let me know. This because there's several. I want to pick up one from Daniel Perez. Is the idea of American Promise to use the constitutional process to put forward an amendment to reverse the Citizens United Supreme Court direction of unlimited money in politics? The answer to that is yes, and the amendment to do so is well along. So check it out at AmericanPromise.net. And then there's a related question: is it clear that corporations contributing to political parties is detrimental to all citizens? I just want to, on that note, that our constitutional amendment empowers Americans to answer that question. If Americans wanted corporate money to go to political parties, under the amendment, that would be up to the American people to say, okay, we don't care, fine. But our judgment is when Americans have the authority, as we had for 200 years, to draw lines about economic and political power and what belongs where, we tended to draw the line that corporate money in political parties was not a good idea for business or for government, for some of the reasons Maureen and Michael have been saying. But also this amendment goes to money from other sources, whether it's unions, whether it's billionaires, the kind of idea that Michael's talking about, where people have a stake at the table, where we're in it together, where your voice and vote matter, even if you don't have a lot of money, that holds a society together and not descend into Hunger Games, is a place where the $100 million into a super PAC from a billionaire is as bad or worse as corporate money or union money in elections. And so the amendment that American Promise is working on lets us get at all of those problems, and you can see a link to it in the chat. And thank you, Dan, for your nice comment there. Elizabeth Doty, a leader in the business and democracy space. Nice to see you here. She asks and points out with a link, more and more companies are adopting policies to prohibit spending. A good way to get in shape for the amendment, keeping the metaphor going. Thank you, Elizabeth. And she has a question that I want to put to both of you. With the corporate political responsibility movement that Elizabeth and others are leading, and I want to kind of go back to the question I raised about the relationship of corporate political responsibility and citizen responsibility to draw guardrails like the amendment. is there a pathway where corporate responsibility conversations can lead from what companies should do to enable us as a country to answer the question about what we all should do about constitutional norms around money and politics? Is it something that where we can see more like Pirelli Tire and Maureen on our advisory council and Michael coming to join us in this kind of conversation, where we can enlarge the constitutional amendment conversation into the business community further, as we are doing with the American Promise Business Network? Do you see that in your conversations with business people at your peer companies? Or how would you see it? What would you advise for American Promise and the folks on this call to help encourage that conversation? Maureen, I see you thinking about it at least.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. First of all, it is difficult. I mean, these are very high level decisions. Obviously, at a very large company, you certainly need CEO and board level a conversation. I love the question about how can people on boards of publicly traded companies, bring this up. That's a great place to bring it up, of course. I think it's hard for companies to take stands on things because, as we've seen, there's a lot of backlash, and it's not always clear within large companies. The path to all come together and evaluate a long-term big and what is essentially political decision. But I think it's starting to happen in one area that we're really seeing a change is investors who recognize climate, for example, as a risk to the company's bottom lines, are putting pressure on individual companies to disclose their own lobbying practices around at least that issue, and also what their trade associations are doing and whether they're in alignment, and whether, because investors who care about climate risk because of the financial implications have been noticing that sometimes a company will say in its sustainability that, we're going towards net zero and we have policies and so on and so forth, but then their trade associations are undermining that by lobbying against it. So that's just one area so far, but I think there's a greater push to at least for more transparency actually coming from investors.
Yeah, and it seems there's also to the extent that the conversation is breaking out among the citizenry about corporate political responsibility, it's like so much in our society broken into some partisan lines, and companies are having to face sort of maybe something that IBM and Pirelli don't because of your policies against political spending. But once you start spending, you're in the political game, and then you're in a partisan environment, and you're quote unquote a progressive company or a conservative company, and you're getting this sort of crossfire of politics when you're trying to do business. Is that a factor as well, Michael? Let me put that to you in terms of why business would be better off with a constitutional amendment, for example, that would allow us to sort of have closer guardrails about money and politics.
Yes, so I'll just respond to Elizabeth's question. And again, I think this is what IBM would say. I don't know for sure. Again, I'm not speaking for IBM, but ideally, I would think anyway that IBM would want all companies to follow our lead, and to stay out of the political realm, and to not be donating to these PACs and to these candidates. That would be the best mode forward. I would say, and besides reputational risk, which I think is significant, and again, if you need to appeal to people's self-interest, I would just say that it has benefited IBM because we're not seen as Republican or Democratic company, and we know that whoever's in the White House or whoever's in control of Congress, they're not going to be there forever. And, we're a 100-year-old company and we want to sell to the other party eventually. We just want to have the best products to sell and not rely on, a particular favoritism from one side or the other side. So I would say that to any company. I'd say to any company that you want to sell to both Republicans and Democrats. Remember what Michael Jordan always says. He says, I don't talk about politics because I want to sell to Republicans and Democrats. And he's got sneakers to sell. But, companies have services that they want to provide as well. So if you need to ultimately go to that self-interest, there is that as well. In addition to just being a good corporate citizen and staying out of it and letting the politicians run the policy and let companies provide the services and the technology.
I think most companies, and hopefully you can hear me better because my microphone is here.
Yeah, that's helpful, Maureen. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I think many companies and trade associations donate to both sides in an effort to avoid being, in an effort to hedge their bets, obviously. But I think what's really concerning is that it's become the norm. It's become accepted that companies do that. And people talk about it.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit again, so I'm not sure but we heard you that it's become the norm, and that's the dangerous and disturbing thing.
Jeff, I wanted to circle around to Jim's first question in the Q&A also. Most businesses favor a very libertarian view on society. Friedman even said that business only goal is to maximize profits. How does that square with society and politics? And so again, I'm just speaking for Mike Donnelly, not speaking for IBM, but I'm a capitalist. I make no apologies for that, but I'm not for crony capitalism. I think there's a big difference between free markets and controlled markets or captured markets, as Maureen said. And so crony capitalism is detrimental to economic growth and it is a far less desired outcome in terms of economic policies than true capitalism and true free markets. So I see a very different split between those two things. So when you say, if someone is to criticize, current American, corruption or pay for play or what is it that we don't like about it? It's not the capitalism part that we don't like. It's the crony part of it that we don't like.
Yeah.
And Milton Friedman didn't like that either. Friedman said he didn't want special interests to take over.
Yeah, so we're seeing the theme again. Maureen's pointed out that Milton Friedman, the famous libertarian, free market oriented economist, also thought crony capitalism was a bad idea. And it goes back, I think, to how we opened it up with Maureen and Michael, which is if we want free markets, we actually have a problem to fix, because this is not free markets right now. Unlimited money in politics is actually distorting markets and distorting a business environment. I want to pick that up on the distortion aspect, because, we talk about the politicization, the cross currents that companies might face if they're viewed as partisan. One solution Maureen mentioned, of course, Americans are understandably cynical about, because it is absolutely true that companies and billionaires, for that matter, give to both sides, or just go to a super PAC and take on representatives that don't go their way, or put up candidates through a super PAC support that might serve their interests. But from the business perspective, we have business leaders who are telling us it actually goes the other way too, where politicians come in, or super PACs are coming to put the arm on business and say, well, your competitors are spending money and it's time for that policy review or that tax policy review, or we're considering a regulation. I'm sure you're going to come to the fundraiser, right? So there can be, as it is in other places and markets, where the politics and the money corruption actually makes it harder to do business. Government can be sometimes people say it's not bribery, it's extortion from the business, and you're draining good capital that you could be using in business because the politicians want some of it. Do you think about that when you're looking at IBM and Pirelli Tires policies, where you can just say, no, we don't do that. Is that actually helpful? And can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly helpful to just completely stay out of that entirely. And so there's never a question as to how much we're going to give or who we're going to give to. We don't give to anyone. So it's really easy to clear the decks and to get to, what problem do you have? It also helps us in our international markets too, because you can imagine in all the, over 100 countries that we do business in, there's been a couple of countries here or there where, bribery is a little bit more acceptable. And it helps IBM to say, no, like we historically never do that. And we will not, if that's going to be what you require, you're going to have to go somewhere else, because we just do not play in that arena. So yeah, it makes our life a lot easier in terms of making decisions, because it's very clear cut.
Yeah. Well, we're going to run out of time. I want to make sure I have time to bring John McCree in, who's going to share some takeaways and action steps we can do. But before I do, let me put up one more question from Dave Black, our great friend and super volunteer leader in Pennsylvania, former CEO of the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce. And Dave has worked closely with us and helped build support for this work at American Promise among many business people, not only in Pennsylvania, but local chambers around the country, local Rotaries. And so we're having a conversation with two of the biggest companies who've been around for 100 years, but they were small companies once with an idea, a family tire business, or a Tom Watson in his garage with IBM. And I think the other issue that we haven't really touched too much on is the, although Michael, you certainly did in your slide deck about innovation, and Maureen, you touched on this too, about the economic environment. For those who don't have any capital to put into politics, they don't even have enough capital to take to scale their ideas. And so I think there's a lot of potential support among the small business community of America through local chambers, local business networks around the country. And I'm sure your leadership and the example you're bringing to us here is helpful to bridge that issue from the small startup business all the way to a Pirelli or an IBM around the world. The interest in a free and fair market is the same. So thank you both for that. And David did have a question to me. So that was a little thanks to David Black and connecting the business communities and local chambers to the conversation tonight. But David says, can you mention the exponential growth of money in elections since the early 2010s? And just to be clear, this is about doubling every election cycle. $20 billion close. I bet it'll be 25 billion plus for the 2024 cycle. We're talking about $200 million as the entry level for a contested Senate race. Georgia, that Maureen mentioned, where money was pouring in from all over the country, was over $500 million in a single Senate election. And we now have super PACs spending millions in local races, district attorney, school committee, and the super PACs and the dark money specializes in divisive attacks and tearing us apart. That's kind of the exponential growth we've seen. So it's not just the amount of money, it's how it's used to really, tear our people apart. And if you start cynical about politics, one election cycle with super PAC multi-billion-dollar spending will sure make you much more cynical by the end of that campaign. So that's some of the issues we're working with, but we can fix it. I started at the top with the number one solvable problem is money in politics. It's solvable by we, the people. We are inspired by Maureen Kline and Michael Donnelly, business leaders being with us. Whether we do it or not is up to the rest of us. It is an act of citizenship. We'll need 2/3 vote of Congress, ratification 3/4 of the states for the next constitutional amendment that can fix this. And we've got a lot of tools at American Promise to help for business people. I'm going to bring in John McCree now, our director of our National Business Network. And before I do, let me just say huge thanks to Maureen Kline and Michael Donnelly again. Thank you so much. And John, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And again, thanks to both Maureen Kline and Michael Donnelly. We definitely hope to have you both as guests of American Promise again soon. And thanks to our co-sponsors, Business for Democracy and State Business Executives. For our listeners tonight, with your limited time, the next steps from 30 seconds on up, please follow us on LinkedIn. I think the link is in the chat. And after that, if you have a few more minutes, please join our business network, and that link is also in the chat. Additionally, you'll have the opportunity to add your name in support of our business statement of principle, and that link is in the chat. If you forget any of these links, just a simple Google search, American Promise and Business Network, and these links will come back up. And of course, please share these links and action items with any of your business friends around the country, regardless of which state they live in. And lastly, if you have legislative connections, either with your county, state, or with your federal delegation, we are always looking to bring constituents, especially people of business, with us for in-person visits. So thank you for your support, and we will see you soon at NCLC in June. Good evening, everyone.